Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. The world's largest diversified mining company has created sweetness for South Africa as it proposes a demerging of assets and sets out to create a new global metals company. Mining Weekly editor Martin Creamer tells us more about BHP Billiton's Newco. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Shannon.
The new global metals company will have a third of its asset made out of Southern African aluminium, manganese and energy coal assets. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I think it's something that's good for South Africa. This is a good South African story because a lot of these assets, a third of them in South Africa, have not been given the management attention or the capital that would turn them to much more positive account. You know, I think these assets are also ready to be sweated. The aluminium are not really a dripping roast, but you know, you've got manganese, which has tremendous promise, energy coal, and then you've also got silver in Australia, which is quite astounding, the volumes that they produce there. And you've also got some of the manganese assets in Australia, and then you've got assets also in South America. So collectively, it's still global, and it adds to the choice on the stock exchanges here in Johannesburg. We see that you know, BHP Billiton has become a company which doesn't go to the frontier anymore. It's got such big assets in some of the developed countries that you know, it can continue for 100 years in some of these places, and it's going to turn into a veritable factory. It's going to turn into a manufacturing business. Whereas these assets, which have been put into Newco, which is still to be given its full name, you know, they're going to come under the CFO of BHP Billiton, Graham Kerr, who's enthusiastic about these. And, you know, you need enthusiasm around these assets, which it did not enjoy under the BHP Billiton, you know, umbrella. So the spinning out of these is going to be something that's good for those companies and good for South Africa, because they're going to have a services hub here. You know, like BHP Billiton has got its services hub in Kuala Lumpur. You know, South Africa will now have the hub for Newco, you know, with about 200 people involved in IT support and payroll. It's also a nice thing to have in South Africa, along with the listing in Johannesburg. But of course, the headquarters will be in Perth. And half of the assets are Australian, so it does make sense. And no matter which way you cut it, if it's, you know, EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax and amortization and depreciation, or replacement cost, you'll still find that over 10 years, you know, the percentage of Australian assets in this is about half, and close to a third South African. So it'll employ about 24,000 people, you know, and it's in 5 countries, and it's going to be something that I think will create some excitement on the stock exchanges.
Which are some of the assets that will fall under Newco? Now,
you've got the hot as hell assets down in the Northern Cape, which are aluminium assets. No, sorry, those are manganese assets, and it's quality manganese. You know, they really are in the first quartile, cost quartile. And the energy coal also in the first cost quartile, because you find that, you know, BHP Billiton only deals in low cost, big operations. So these are at the smaller end of the BHP Billiton. If you look at the contribution, it's about between 3 and 4% of their total. So in the past, it's been bigger, of course, you know. But with the operations that BHP Billiton keeps, it hopes it'll be able to work through the cycles, you know, with this big iron ore and copper and coking coal, and then it's prepared to spin these off and allow someone else to lead them vigorously and get much more out of them. And the initial part of it would probably be to sweat the assets.
Now, it seems Newco CEO designate Graham Kerr was at pains to convince analysts that the demerger isn't a divestment of BHP in South Africa.
Yes, and it certainly isn't, because BHP itself doesn't leave South Africa. 8 to 9% of its shareholding is South African. So BHP stays as a secondary inward listing on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And it also stays, you know, as it is. Its office remains here, etc. And it will continue to explore for oil and gas, which is important, you know, off our west coast. You want a big company like BHP Billiton to be drilling there. deep water drilling. You need deep pockets to get that going. And, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And they can take that sort of risk. And they are doing the seismic surveys already. And they will also take other opportunities in South Africa and Africa as they see fit, provided it fits their long life, big scale type approach, which they're moving into now. But I think the more type of the more vigor will come out of Newco, which will also be strongly based here, which will have South Africans on the board. They're talking about Kalani Makwanazi, who is the executive chairman of BHP Billiton here, also being on this Newco board. And then there will be other South Africans. There will be also South Africans leading it in South Africa. Beside, Graham Kerr will be in Perth. But a leadership team, strong leadership team with South African influence will be here, and given quite a lot of flexibility and more entrepreneurial flexibility than BHP Billiton allows.
When does Newco expect to start generating dividends for its shareholders?
I think that it'll probably be listed. The plan is to list it in the middle of next year. So it'll be listed, a main listing in the ASX in Australia, secondary inward listing in Johannesburg, and dividends can start coming immediately because it's generating cash. It's a good cash generator. And we saw with Sibanye, when Goldfields spun off Sibanye, and they kept the assets that they wanted to, and they let Sibanye take some of the deep, dark and dangerous assets, gold assets here. I mean, the share of Sibanye has performed better than the Goldfield share, and it's galloping still. It's been a marvelous sort of way of getting a spin-off really working. And I think that this is what BHP Billiton wants as well. It wants this to work. It's going to put everything behind it to make it work. It doesn't want it not to work, with the same attitude you had with Goldfields. They wanted Sibanye to work. And that is good for shareholders. And I think the dividends will flow early.
I saw a little birdie say that they're looking at about a 15% investment return.
And if you look at what the return they're getting now on their assets, it's like a regular 34%. It's a good bunch of assets. I mean, all right, it's nothing like BHP, which is an absolute giant. I mean, the rest of BHP.
Yeah.
But if you look at it on its own, wow, it's a good company
impressive.
with a 34% return, EBITDA over the years, and employing 24,000 people, as I said, 5 countries, scope to grow in Africa. And if you've got the base in South Africa, they're going to be looking across the border. They're already across the border because they're at Mosel. And Mosel is an aluminium smelter, which is slightly favoured to Hillside. That Mosel makes a profit, Hillside doesn't quite, I believe. But so Mosel is also, has the benefit of getting power from hydro electricity, and therefore it's seen as clean, which is an advantage, whereas the Hillside gets Eskom power, but of course at a very, very low rate, and it's been benefiting from that for a long time, because the deal they did on the tariff that they'd get from Eskom was based on the aluminium price. And if the aluminium price was low, then the Eskom tariff would be low. And if the aluminium price rose, then the Eskom tariff would rise. But of course the aluminium price has been down. So they've been getting the benefit of this low tariff electricity. And it's an interesting operation. You go out there, I mean, it's very well run, and the people who work there are well heeled. When you look at the cars in the parking lot, a lot of very smart cars in there. So it does do a lot for that area in Richards Bay, and you want to keep it going. And I think with an extra managerial effort and some innovation, with some downstream activity there returned, attention, tender loving care, and that's what it hasn't been getting.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Martin.
It's a great pleasure, Shannon.
That's it for today. Join us again next week for more news analysis on South Africa's mining industry.